us to keep in mind that you are in control of everything and that you have us here for a reason at this time. So pray that you'll give us understanding. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today we're going to call this the world of the Polycrisis, and I'll explain that in just a moment. But, it's interesting when I look at, I read a lot of secular press and that type of thing, and it's really reached a point where a lot of what you see is spin. So, for example, some people criticize me, like I'll quote from the New York Times, and I don't believe everything I read in the New York Times because I know a lot of it is spin. But even the New York Times, if you dig into the articles, you will find actual facts reported on. So there's some facts that they're reporting about the upcoming elections and that sort of thing, but they bury it like in the last 4 or 5 paragraphs of the article. So sometimes you just need to know that that's what's happening. You can, so it's a way to read it, but I understand the perspective that a lot of these things come from, but I also want you to understand what people in the world are thinking. That's why we quote and play clips of Yuval Harari and the people at the World Economic Forum and these other conferences that are held, because we want you to see what they're saying. And then we analyze things in a big framework of a lot of Bible prophecy passages. I don't read those passages every week. I assume that you're going to be aware of some of them. So that's my approach, and that's how I do it. So this is a polycrisis that we live in, and I think this is what the Lord predicted would be at the time of the end. And I sort of built this little grid that I did from various passages, one of which is Matthew 24, where Jesus says, he goes through the birth pangs and he describes the birth pangs. And then he says, and when you see all these things, look up. So the conclusion that you can draw from that is when you see all these things are going to be happening at relatively the same time. And they're going to be happening, they're going to be accelerating, they're going to be converging. The pattern of prophecy is that the way things were at the first coming of Jesus will be the way that things were at the second coming of Jesus. And we know that most of those Bible prophecies were fulfilled in that last week of Jesus' life regarding his first coming. I think the same thing will happen regarding his second coming. So you'll see there will be these, we talk about the seals and the trumpets a little bit and the bowls. And with regard to the seals, I think the seals will open, but there'll be like a upward progression of what happens. So, for example, we'll have a better understanding of when they're happening. Now, I get a lot of emails, and I try to review a lot of them. I don't have time to respond to them. I get phone calls, and I try to do the best I can, but I get between 500 and 1,000 emails and messages a day, and it's a little bit hard to sift through that. And the only thing, sometimes I guess I could say I wish my 401k increased at the rate that my email inbox increases, but that doesn't seem to be happening. So we just have to be paying attention to these things. And Daniel talks about the time that, these things are going to happen. They're going to happen quickly. But the wise, the people who are in the book, looking at the prophecies and looking at what's going on, they will be given understanding and they'll be able to instruct many. So that's what we hope to try to do around here. So let me jump over to, let me just start with the headline, and then I'll look at the article that I was referencing, and when I came up with my title, because I lifted it directly from a editorial in the Financial Times the other day. I think yesterday's Financial Times. And so this was a brutal week for tech companies, right? They lost $500 billion in market value this week, like Google, Amazon. Facebook is down 70% in stock value since the beginning of the year. Now, I know that that's In many quarters, that's cause for celebration. But, you know, the companies, they have real people that work for them, but, you know, sometimes you're going to get what you deserve. So Elon Musk bought Twitter. The deal closed this week. He went in and immediately fired the CEO, I think the COO, CFO, and the chief legal counsel. And so there's a lot of people who are real excited, like Twitter's going to be a free speech platform. But I have to tell you, I've sort of monitored things. And I can tell you one thing that I've seen almost immediately come on the platforms is some pretty vile anti-Semitic comments. I mean, anti-Jewish comments. And I've seen those starting to appear already. And I just think that with the way social media is, it's only going to get worse. So let me read a little bit from this article by Adam Tooze in the Financial Times. And he says, "Welcome to the world of the Polycrisis." So here's what he says. Pandemic, drought, floods, megastorms, and wildfires, threats of a third world war, how rapidly we have become inured to the list of shocks. So much so that from time to time, it's worth standing back to consider the sheer strangeness of our situation. As former U.S. Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers recently remarked, this is the most complex, disparate, and cross-cutting set of challenges that I can remember in the 40 years that I've been paying attention to such things. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. I've been following this stuff for a long time, and it's pretty daunting. Back to the article. Of course, familiar economic mechanisms still have huge power. A bond market panic felled an incompetent British government. Now, let me just make one comment on this. Liz Truss was driven out, and she had the shortest prime ministership of any prime minister in the history of England, or the UK. But it didn't happen in those 45 days that she was the prime minister. There was a reason why she was probably booted, and if I get to it, I'll mention it. Well, I'll talk about it right now. She came in, and one of the first things she did, now you can question whether there should have been tax cuts and that thing, but she recognized that there was an energy crisis, that Britain was facing an energy crisis, just as most of Europe is this, as are a lot of parts of the world, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. So what she did was she came in and she said, well, let's start fracking. I'm going to allow fracking. Now, this is not allowed in the global order now because there is a climate change religion that's in place. And, you know, one of the cardinal sins, the unforgivable sins of climate change and the green religion that seems to be predominating in the world right now is you can't do fracking. You know, so everybody gets on their private plane and flies to a conference where they talk about don't fly on private planes. And it just seems to be a bit more than hypocritical. So back to this article in the Financial Times. So a bond market panic felled an incompetent British government. It was, you might say, a textbook case of market discipline. But why were all the gilt markets, and that's similar to our bond markets here in the United States, so jumpy to begin with? The backdrop was the mammoth energy subsidy bill and the Bank of England's determination to unwind the huge portfolio of bonds that had piled up fighting the Charlie Vector 019er pandemic. With economic and non-economic shocks entangled all the way down, it is little wonder that an unfamiliar term is gaining currency, the polycrisis. A problem becomes a crisis when it challenges our ability to cope and thus threatens our identity. In the polycrisis, the shocks are disparate. They are but they interact so that the whole is even more overwhelming than the sum of the parts. At times, one feels as if one is losing one's sense of reality. Is the mighty Mississippi really running dry and threatening to cut off the forms of the Midwest from the world economy? Did the January 6 riots really threaten the U.S. Capitol? Are we really on the point of uncoupling the economies of the West from China? Things that would have once been seen fanciful are now facts. And there's tremendous spin on everything. For example, you may have heard about this little incident that occurred in San Francisco. And I will say I studied it. I've looked at the tweets. I listened to the police and that type of thing. And then I've heard all the people on MSNBC and CNN and everybody saying this was a right-winger who did this. This guy was a nut. Okay, look, we can agree that he was a complete wacko. But there's probably something more going on too. I mean, she's third in line to the presidency of the United States. And I know her house, and her house is in a very exclusive neighborhood. Don't they have security cameras? I think there's something going on here that more than meets the eye. And I have my own conclusions. If you want to email me, I'll tell you what my conclusions are. But I think that Mr. Pelosi was engaged in some extracurricular activity that went wrong. That's my opinion. Prove me wrong. Release all the security footage and prove me wrong. And you can't tell me that a couple that's worth a couple $100 million. Now imagine that. She went to Congress and now they're worth a couple $100 million. Why? Because she's corrupt as anybody that comes. And now they'll say, oh, look, it's people like you are saying bad things about her. I'm just telling you what the facts are. How does somebody go to Congress for 40 years and make every buy-sell decision in your stock portfolio the correct one? How do you get invited in on these sweetheart deals for initial public offerings? So here's a New York Times editorial, Haunted America, and the Pelosi's nightmare. Spooky Republicans write a national horror story. And I mean, so when you read through, sometimes I'll do something, I guess just to torture myself. I'll read through a thread on Twitter. Someone will make a statement, and then everybody starts piling on. Matt Walsh makes a statement about, I'm glad that Vanderbilt did this, and then just people, that Vanderbilt stopped doing these surgeries, mutilation surgeries on children, and then the whole pile on comes. And by the way, around here, we're not unsympathetic to people who struggle with this issue, but what we do have and it takes people many, many years to get over this, and a lot of times they've been subjected to abuse, sexual abuse in their own upbringing, and we understand that, but you don't support parents who just want something to happen to their kid that thinks that it's cool. And I could go on and on about the transgender thing, but that's not really the subject of today. But back to this article on the Polycrisis. A problem becomes a crisis when it challenges our ability to cope and thus threatens our identity. In the Polycrisis, the shocks are disparate, but they are interact so that the whole is even more overwhelming than the sum. And as someone feels like, you just feel like, what's going on? Things that would once have seemed fanciful are now facts. This comes as a shock. But how new is it really? And he goes back to the 2008-2009 financial crisis. He talks about what happened back in the 1970s. In the 1970s, whether you were a Euro-communist, an ecologist, or an angst-ridden conservative, you could still attribute your worries to a single cause: late capitalism, too much or too little economic growth, or an excess of entitlement. A single cause also meant that one could imagine a sweeping solution, be it a social revolution or neoliberalism. He goes on to say, but what makes the crises of the past 15 years so disorienting is that it no longer seems plausible to point to a single cause and by implication a single fix. So I want you to understand this in the context of what Jesus talks about in Matthew 24, birth pangs, increasing birth pangs. When you see all these things, I mean, we're living at this time of acceleration and convergence. And we need to understand that I don't think it changes at this point. I don't think we go back to the good old days of like early 2022 or 2021 or the great salad days of 2020 when all we had to worry about were, a shutdown economy. So anyway, so this article continues. I think this is a wise man. I don't necessarily agree with some of his solutions or ideas about solutions, but I think he's seeing the problem. And the concern too is if a secular guy like this, I don't know what his religious background is, if he's seeing this, why is it that so many people in the church don't? And I was talking to somebody this week, I won't even say the state that they come from, and they say they go to a church and the church will not talk about anything related to this because it's just, it's too controversial. But I think people want to understand and hear about this and at least have a discussion. So anyway, the author says this: meanwhile, the diversity of problems is compounded by the growing anxiety that economic and social development are hurtling us towards catastrophic ecological tipping points. Now, he's a climate change guy, and we can criticize him for that. The pace of change is staggering. In the early 1970s, the global population was less than half what it is today, and China and India were desperately poor. Today, the world is organized for the most part into powerful states. To imagine that our future problems will be those of 50 years ago is to fail to grasp the speed and scale of historical transformation. So put that in context of what I've talked about with the World Economic Forum, transhumanism, which I think is related to the whole LGBTQ transgender thing in great part, because if we can get you to question your own biological sex that you're born with, getting you to do something to turn you into a cyborg of some kind will be easier. And so it happens very, very quickly. So what is the outlook? In a world that one could envisage being dominated by a single fundamental source of tension, you could imagine a climatic crisis from which resolution might emerge. But that kind of Wagnerian scenario no longer seems plausible. Modern history appears as a tale of progress by way of improvisation, innovation, reform, and crisis management. We have dodged several Great Depressions, devised vaccines to stop disease and avoid nuclear war. Perhaps innovation will also allow us to master the environmental crises looming ahead. I hate to break it to him. Perhaps. See, he doesn't even believe that. But it is an unrelenting foot race because what crisis fighting and technological fixes all too rarely do is address the underlying trends. The more successful we are at coping, the more the tension builds. If you had found the past few years stressful and disorienting, if your life has already been disrupted, it is time to brace. Our tightrope walk with no end is only going to become more precarious and nerve-wracking. So we'll give this guy, our guest updater of the week, because I think he's nailed it. This is a very difficult time. Now, it's hard to grasp sometimes. It's because in many respects we're protected from a lot of it. We're not in a major crisis. I do the grocery shopping, so I can go to Costco and I see that they've raised the price of the muffins, $2 from $6.99 or from $7.99 to $9.99. And it's to say, you get 12 muffins or whatever it is, big muffins. But so you see things like that. You look, I saw prime beef at Costco the other day, $22 a pound for beef tenderloin. That's pretty amazing. I saw another post, a guy posted on Facebook, hey, I went to Five Guys. I got a double burger, large fries, and a large drink. $22. Five Guys for one person. I grew up in the days of the McDonald's All-American meal, which 47 cents, I think it was, for a cheeseburger, a milkshake, and fries. 47 cents. Times have changed. And you won't do that at McDonald's either, by the way. But then we have also this. We know that this is prophesied in 2 Timothy chapter 3, but know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving. Does it sound like he was looking forward to our time? Unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good. Traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power, and from such turn away. For of this sort are those who creep into households and make captives of gullible women, loaded down with sins, led away by various lusts, always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. Now, as Jannes and Jambres resisted Moses, so do these also resist the truth. Men of corrupt minds, disapproving concerning the faith, but they will progress no further, for their folly will be manifest to all, as theirs also was. And he's referring to Jannes and Jambres there. So let me reference this article from the tablet a friend sent me this week, and I think this is sort of indicative of a 2 Timothy chapter 3 world. And the title it's an article written by Michael Lind. It's in the tablet, which is a Jewish publication, and it's called The New Gatekeepers, How the Major Institutions of American Society All Came to Sing in the Woke Chorus and What Can Be Done About It. So listen to just a couple paragraphs of this article, and you can find it at the tablet, tabletmag.com. Michael Lind, The New Gatekeepers. On or about December 1910, human character changed, wrote Virginia Woolf. Between 2010 and 2012, American culture changed. Within a few years, what has been obscure concepts in politicized university departments like gender studies and ethnic studies became orthodoxy not only in the academy, media, and the nonprofit sector, but also in the boardrooms of national and global corporations, banks, and in professional associations like the American Bar and medical associations. Now, I dropped my membership in the American Bar Association many years ago. In part, I did go to American Bar Association conference in San Francisco, of all places, in 1992. Beautiful city, wonderful city, pretty, great climate and everything, but there was the wife of the presidential candidate came and spoke, and the crowd went crazy. It was Hillary Clinton. And she gave an award to Anita Hill concerning Justice Clarence Thomas. And so I knew then that my days were numbered. I continued my membership for a while, but then they became totally pro-abortion. Like, you could not have any other view and be part of the American Bar Association. And now it's expanded into transgender stuff, and local law firms are sponsoring these seminars on LGBTQ and the law with drag queens and that sort of thing. And the Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, who's a Republican. She's leaving office soon, thank goodness, Maureen O'Connor. But this is norm now. This is true everywhere. So Michael Lind goes on and says, in 2010, if you said that unisex bathrooms in public schools were necessary to accommodate non-binary students, hardly anyone, even among progressives, would have known what you were talking about. Then in 2016, the Obama Education Department suddenly threatened to cut off federal funding to K-12 schools that did not allow students suffering from gender dysphoria to use bathrooms reserved for the opposite sex. And now you have examples. The University of Pennsylvania nominates a guy who still has his guy stuff as the female athlete of the year in the NCAA. Because, well, he thinks he's a woman. And very few people speak up against it. Why? Because they've threatened with losing their scholarships and everything if they speak up against it. I saw a couple, father-daughter on It was on Fox someplace, Tucker Carlson, probably the other night. She was 14. She was on a volleyball team. There's one 14-year-old guy at school who says he's a girl, and so they allow him to get in the female locker room and change. And so some of the girls complained, and they were said, you can go change. Here's a single stall bathroom. All 14 of you can change in. He gets the whole locker room if you can't handle it. One gal continued to complain. She was on there with her father, and they suspended her. She's 14 years old. There can be no question at this point, but that they're coming after the children. And that plays into communism and Marxism. Back to the article, the Obama Justice Department threatened to sue North Carolina for passing a law requiring people to use bathrooms corresponding to the sex on their birth certificates. By the time that it rescinded the law, HB 2 in 2017, the state of North Carolina had lost billions of dollars thanks to simultaneous boycotts by the National Basketball Association, the NCAA, Deutsche Bank, PayPal, and other corporations and financial institutions. And Pam told me this morning that PayPal said, remember that $2,500 thing they put in and said, if we find that you're engaged in bad misconduct, we will deduct $2,500 for your account for each incident, and we'll freeze your account for up to 6 months. And PayPal came and said, oh, well, we didn't really mean, that wasn't really to be made. That was just somebody playing around. But my understanding is they still haven't removed it from their website. So we're looking into alternatives on using that particular company here at FBC, just because we don't want to do this. In isolation, the transgender controversy might have been viewed as a strange aftershock of the gay rights movement, which achieved its much more moderate goals of civil and marriage equality for gay men and lesbian women by the first decade of the 21st century. And we saw that decision. It came down on June 28th, or Obergefell, June 28th, 2015. That was like, I don't like the term, but that was like a tribulation period ago, if you catch my drift. It was followed by the march through the institutions of diversity, equity, and inclusion based on critical race theory, a sectarian ideology that holds all whites and white adjacent Asian Americans, no matter how poor and powerless, are privileged, while all Black and Hispanic Americans, no matter how rich and powerful, are marginalized members of underserved communities. By the 1920s, at one university after another, applicants for faculty positions were required to submit DEI statements, diversity, equity, and inclusion statements, listing the ways that they would personally advance this particular ideology through their work as teachers and researchers. Campus commissars were appointed to ensure that the faculty reading lists and guest speaker panels had the appropriate race and gender makeup. And corporations banked universities and government agencies the relatively anodyne diversity training in the late 20th century, designed to minimize the possibility of racial or sexual discrimination lawsuits, gave way to DEI trainings. And I went through it too when I worked in a secular law firm. So it goes on. This is a great article. Let me see if he has a conclusion here, because I could read it, but it would take about 20 minutes to read through. In other areas and in other countries, public tyranny has indeed been a major threat to individual freedoms. In the United States, in the third decade of the 21st century, the private tyranny of universities, professional associations, and tech platforms is a greater threat than the tyranny of an oppressive state. When it comes to reducing the power of the new interest in the private sector, the restoration of our liberties requires an expansion of democratically accountable government. And I think that's part of what this election is about. And listen, I don't think we're going to build the kingdom of God on earth, okay? But we still have input into things. So this, I think, plays right into what 2 Timothy chapter 3 was talking about. How did this happen? Well, it happened because it seems like it's the end of time. And I don't think it's a hard case to make anymore. I mean, I love, the argument and making the case that this is the time. And I think that the things that we talk about week after week after week, and it's on a cultural basis, but it's also on a geopolitical basis, it's on a economic basis. It's like everything is in play. So what the guy in the Financial Times was talking about is it's like this, well, he didn't use the term, convergence of everything happening all at once, and that's the world that we live in. So let's look at a few of these things that are going on. I mean, for example, here's a picture, and I noticed this playing golf yesterday, that the ponds are down lower. I mean, earlier this year, everything was flooding. I mean, we had all those rains. Remember, it was rain after rain, and one of the golf courses I play at, they were closed all the time because they have a couple creeks to go through there, and they were flooded. Now the ponds on a lot of the golf courses around here, they're lower than I've ever seen them to be. But this has an impact. So this is kind of of course, the darker brown areas are areas where the soil moisture is down, up to 40%. And this is this is the change over 6 months. So you see in the, like New Mexico, which doesn't have much water anyway, if you've ever been there. I think it has the least amount of surface water of any state in the United States. And I know from some family that live down around Austin, Texas now, they've had a lot of rains, and we know that they've had a lot down in southern Florida, but look at the rest of the country. And this has a big impact. Look at the impact that it's having on different, this is a tweet looking at grain production. And I'll go through these individually. So here's a U.S. drought monitor. It shows you the dark red areas are parts of the country that are in a major drought. Exceptional drought. Red, that's dark red. Red is just extreme drought. But this is a lot of where crops and things are grown for food. Like, we don't have a food crisis in the world anyway because of the war in Ukraine. But so here's cotton areas in drought. And you'll see, and so their conclusion is approximately 68% of cotton production is within an area experiencing drought. And that's a big deal because cotton requires, it's kind of interesting, cotton requires about as much water as any crop to grow. But then you get cottonmouth when you're dry. So that's, I'm sure there's a reason for that. I'll have to think through that one a little bit. Barley areas, 72% in drought. Here is corn, 70% in drought. And I can remember last year we drove out through Kansas, Colorado, and it looked horrible. I mean, it just looked awful. Now, other places, they're having record crops. But, so this is sort of a historical average. It goes back to 2021, and you can see that the percent of corn located in drought, it's gone from like 24% a year ago, 19% a year ago, to now 70%. That's a fairly significant increase. And that will have carry-on effects. Here's soybean, 71% in areas of drought. 71%. Here is spring wheat, 75% in drought. And then winter wheat, and I was reading an article about winter wheat, and it was just saying, listen, I mean, winter wheat, it's the seed stock that they got from, I don't remember where it came from, Australia or someplace, was contaminated. It's not germinating. And so the winter wheat, in addition to the drought, has the seed problem. And winter wheat is important. Last year they had a bad year down in Texas, which accounts for a lot of the winter wheat. It just didn't grow during the winter like it usually does. Here's a little graphic. The middle one is a long stretch of the Mississippi River. This is a picture taken near Memphis. And then I have a blown up part of it near Memphis. The river in Memphis right now is 14.3 feet below low stage. So I saw a picture of a yacht club in Memphis, and the yacht club was like, every these big boats that people have, expensive boats, they were all sitting in mud because there's no water in the river. And they can't bring barges through. They need about 9-foot depth to get the barge and tugs through. And they can't do it. But there's still a current in the river. So I heard somebody talking about a barge captain who spent a day just fighting the current, but he couldn't go anywhere. But just to keep where he was, he spent $11,000 in fuel in one day. That's one barge captain. Now, they might have a series of barges together controlled by a tugboat. But this is what makes America prosperous, is our waterways. It's 1/10 the cost to ship things by water than it is by anything else. That's why you see all of these ships everywhere. I don't know if I have hang on a second. I'm going to try to grab I took a screenshot. Now I don't see it in my slide deck. I talk a lot about it's probably in here someplace and I'm just not seeing it. Here's a screenshot I took this morning from marinetraffic.com. And the big port area where all the green ships are cargo ship, the green dots are cargo ships. The red dots are tankers. And so this is Shanghai, China. And you can see the southern end you can see Japan over there at the right and South Korea above it. But look at this thing. The gray dots, those are ships that are out of service. Now, I showed you a picture of this a while ago. This is way worse than it was a couple months ago. All these ships are sitting there and they've just kind of shut off their transponder and they're just sitting there waiting for something to do. What does that mean? And listen, I've looked at this before. That used to be like all green dots. Now it's almost all gray dots. The ships are not transporting anything. What's that going to do to supply chains? And part of it is because the world economy is shutting down. Speaking of shutting down, the largest manufacturer of chemicals in Europe is BASF. And here in the foreground is a picture of this massive plant that they have. It covers 10 square kilometers in Germany. And it's a very complex operation. This is the CEO, Martin Broodmiller. And he announced this week that in large part, I talked about this a couple weeks ago. A couple weeks ago, I had a report out of the Financial Times and some other newspapers that said that BASF, and I don't know what that stands for. It's a German thing. If you think my Hebrew's bad, let me try the German thing. But anyway, BASF announced a couple weeks ago that if their allocation of natural gas, because they make chemicals, they make fertilizer, they make all kinds of things, and these very complex operations, natural gas is like the core component. And they said if their natural gas allocation got to 50% of what they would have expected, the whole plant would shut down. And when those plants shut down, they don't reopen. They almost have to reconstruct the plant. And so now BASF has come out and said, listen, their plant uses as much natural gas as the nation of Switzerland. But they're not getting gas. They're not getting allocation. And what they're getting is so expensive, they're saying we can't afford to operate. So they're shutting down a large portion of the plant. and they're going to move their operations to China. Like, that's a really good thing, right? With the way China's going. But this thing accounts for a lot of fertilizer. And so fertilizer stocks are dwindling around the world, and the fertilizer stocks are going to whoever's paying the price. So third world, they're not getting the fertilizer. And the way the seeds are now, they need fertilizer to unlock their productivity. So you might not have seen a lot of food shortages yet, kind of spotty here and there, particularly in America. But I was listening to an interview with Michael Yon. He's a good international reporter, geopolitics. And he said, listen, 2023 is going to be really bad. And 2024, I don't even want to talk about the way this is going. So then this raises all these questions about, so are the horsemen of Revelation riding? And when I talked to Tom Hughes, I think the last time I did an interview with him last Monday, I said, when do you say that the horse, like the pale horse, where it says a measure of wheat, a measure of wheat costs a day's wages. That's essentially what the prophecy says. Well, do you wait until that happens, or do you start saying, well, I think we're on the road to that when it's like half a day's wages for a measure of wheat? Do you understand what I'm saying? When do you make that call? Now, I'm not comfortable making that call without a couple, three witnesses, but I'm just saying is, at some point, those of us in the Bible prophecy community have to sit down and have a big discussion about when do you make the call and how do you make the call? Because I think we're getting close to the time when the call may need to be made. Now, that call may not comport with all of our charts and graphs and timelines and that sort of thing, but a lot of people write to me and say, we're in the fourth seal, we're in the third seal. All those horsemen are riding, the seals have opened. As again, I'm not ready to make that call yet, but I think it's a subject that we need to talk about. So BASF, the world's largest chemicals producer, this month announced heavy cost-cutting measures to deal with Moscow's gas cutoff. If a cold winter forces Germany into gas rationing, BASF said it could also find itself having to shutter its flagship plant, which employs 39,000 people. And even if that doesn't happen, analysts warn high gas prices will likely still force the firm and many of its regional peers to close key operations next year, leaving European customers more reliant on American and Asian suppliers for chemicals used in everything from fertilizer and disinfectants to food and packaging. BASF began life in 1865 as the Baden aniline and soda factory and was already the global chemical leader by 1900. For that, the company earned $93 billion in revenue last year. Gas isn't just an energy source for powering its production, it's also a key ingredient in the remarkable change of production processes that takes place at the company's sprawling flagship complex in the Rhineland city of Ludwigshafen. I'm sure that I need to sort of spit when I say part of those syllables, but anyway, so this is the world we live in. Here's another story. This is not, I don't know how bad this is. These things are kind of cyclical throughout the year, but a lot of people are reporting on this. A diesel shortage is spreading across the United States. Here's a little interview on Family Research Council Washington Watch show with Dave Walsh. And you can follow Dave Walsh on Getter, GETTR.com, at Dave Walsh Energy. I think he's a wise guy. He's been an energy plant executive overseeing construction of energy plants, power plants all around the world. Here's what he says about the diesel shortage.
Well, diesel fuel is essential to our life as we know it, industrially, on a personal level. All durable goods are shipped in vehicles using diesel fuel. All foods are shipped The entire intermodal rail system between states is diesel powered, diesel locomotives, black start engines that drive the power generation system in the background to keep the grid stable are diesel fired black start backups. Diesel's at the core of everything, industrially and farming, of course. Farm machinery is entirely run by diesel. Bus systems in cities are run by diesel. So we're at globally the lowest level of global inventory since 1982, despite having 3.4 billion more people on Earth since 1982. Nationally, we are at the lowest supply ever. There's 25.4 day supply. There are some not entirely negative reasons for that. We're coming out of a fall outage season. Typically in refineries, the turnaround season is in September, October. Refineries tend to be down for maintenance. We're coming out of that. So there's some good news there. But despite that, we're at the lowest level per day of capacity that we've been ever. And we're heading into late fall, winter heating season. We're in the Northeast and upper Midwest. Diesel fuel is used a lot for winter heating. So, some concern we may have some shortages. Inventory across the industry of manufacturers of refiners. Typically, we'd have, on the East Coast, we'd have about 44 million barrels on hand. Right now, we have about 24.4 million barrels. So we're low by about half of what a typical supply would be at this time of the year. Despite coming out of an outage season, right now, we typically have 44 million barrels. We have about a little less than 24 million right now. So it is a bit of a problem.
Is there a reason to think that we're going to catch up? Do our refinery capacity, is it there? So we're going to get that cushion back, or do you expect to see it shrink? Is there a real risk that we're going to run out?
Well, we were about this low back in early May. So this cyclically did happen about 6 months ago. The winter season is a little bit worrisome, again, because we're heading into, what appears to be, it's been a fairly cool early fall. And if we have a cold winter in the Northeast and upper Midwest, we could run into some supply issues. Pricing is high. We've had 6 major refineries shutter in the 2020, 2021 period. We had very low demand in that recession we had in March through August of 20, when COVID hit really hard, things were shut down. A lot of refineries were closed. 6 of them were closed permanently coming out of that. One in New Mexico, California, one in North Dakota, one in Wyoming, Shell in Louisiana, and then the Philadelphia Energy Solutions refinery was closed. All these do diesel fuel and collectively produce about 750,000 barrels per day of diesel fuel. So we're short on national capacity significantly because of that in refining space.
And so one of the things that happened was there was a meeting at the White House this week, and Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, who I really don't think she knows what she's doing or what she's talking about. She said, hey, well, we'll just open all those refineries that Dave Walsh just talked about. And here's what the oil executives told her. Those refineries are never reopening. Never. We haven't built new refineries in the United States since the 1970s. Are there more people around now than there were back in the 1970s? So the system is like right on a razor edge all the time. And now there's a convergence of a number of factors which make it very scary. This is from Intelligencer. I also saw this at the New York Magazine. Joe Biden's big diesel problem. On Wednesday, President Joe Biden announced that the federal government would be selling another 15 million barrels of oil from the U.S. Strategic Reserve after pulling 180 million barrels out of it over the past 6 months, drawing it down to multi-decade lows. Biden also called on oil companies to lower prices and is mulling a ban on exports. All these moves are designed to keep the system going. The reasons behind this get directly to why there are no easy fixes for this kind of problem. As Javier Blas at Bloomberg points out, diesel stockpiles should be 30% higher than they are right now. The banning of Russian oil and gas for much of the Western world is a major reason for that drop. But the whiplash in demand following Charlie Vector 019 or lockdowns is also still affecting the global supply. The last time that there was this little supply, there were about 3.5 billion fewer people on the planet. That doesn't even get to the vast expansion in infrastructure, farm equipment, everything. Kerosene in the Northeast, a lot of houses still are heated by this, and they're rationing it across the Northeast. It's a big problem. Here's another article from Bloomberg. The U.S. diesel crisis is here, and it's spreading along the coast. The strategic oil preserves, this is a screenshot from, I think, Tucker Carlson the other night. So the last time it was this low was in July of 1984, during the Reagan administration. And look at the drop that it's had since Biden took office. And why did they do it? Because they wanted to lower gas prices for the election. And in other words, they wanted to bribe you. This is from the energy, and you can see from 1982 to now, look at the drop in the strategic oil, the strategic petroleum reserve. This even came up at the conference that I talked about last week, the Financial Investment Initiative Institute Conference, the sixth reiteration of that that's being held this week in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And here's the Saudi oil minister, and here's what he had to say. Hey, you know, the subject came up. What do you think about countries using their strategic petroleum reserves? You think that's a good idea?
If you look and you talk to even people that are market experts, there is a gulf of difference that the world has X percentage of excess capacity, then a lesser capacity available at time of crisis, which are, as you have been saying, could be imminent.
Right.
Can you imagine that this so-called potential of a more severe crisis happens when the world has less capacity? And I would have to say also, less emergency stocks. People are depleting their emergency stocks,
Yes.
had depleted it, used it as a mechanism to manipulate markets, while it is profound purpose was to mitigate shortages of supply, be it as it may, it's everybody's choice. However, it is my profound duty to make it clear to the world that losing emergency stock may become painful in the months to come.
Well, that's encouraging. And listen, whether you like Saudi Arabia or not, okay, there's one thing about the Saudis. They know about oil. That's like what they really have in addition to sand. And so here's another thing that came out, the global food crisis back on. Russia bails from grain deal, blaming a Ukraine drone attack on its naval facilities at Sevastopol in the Crimean Peninsula that Russia took over in 2014 from Ukraine. And they're saying, you know, so today they were blaming the British. Putin was blaming the British for doing it. I don't know. Somebody attacked it. I don't know if the ships were destroyed or just damaged. But Russia says, okay, fine. That's our Navy. Our Navy, in part, was to protect these grain shipments coming out of Ukraine. We're done. Good luck. And so what's that going to do to grain prices? We'll have to see what the markets look like tomorrow. I will refer to this. I referred to this in my midweek update a little bit. This change in China. Xi has become as powerful, in my view, as Mao was. And you need to understand, too, that Xi's father was in the Chinese Communist Party, and he was purged by Mao at one point in time. So he knows what purging is like. And then there was this incident that took place with his predecessor, this man in the left photo that's sitting there looking a bit bewildered. Xi is to his left. And these people came, and there was this... They took papers away from him, and the New York Times has some pretty high definition videos of this. It's clear that he didn't want to go. Somebody tried to maybe stop him, and I think they held the guy back. And so what Xi has done is he's put all of his little acolytes in power now. And the interesting thing is he walked by, I think there was like, in the first and second row, there were like 39 leaders of Russia. You walked by and nobody looked at them. They acted like nothing was going on. I don't know if this guy will ever be seen again. And he was the head of the Chinese Communist Party before Xi. It's not like he's an inconsequential player in China's history. And Xi is now, you'll see the guy, he makes a plea here to Xi to, can I stay? And Xi just sort of says, you're going away. I don't know what he said, but he had papers. And I mean, look at all these leaders there. So this is what one magazine or publication had. I thought that was good. And it's interesting, the whole philosophy of the Chinese Communist Party and the things that they do. You know, there's been these rumors for years about the selling of organs and that sort of thing. And now you see this. This is from the National Post in Canada, talking about the fact that reviving the dead for their organs. So what happens is if you're in a Canadian hospital now, at least they're putting in these regulations. They have this big controversy right now over MAID, MAID, medical assistance in dying. And they had a doctors association from Quebec was talking about, we want to apply this to children under the age of 2. Well, they can't consent to that. Well, we'll evaluate their lives to see if they're worth living. They might have medical problems or medical issues or a handicap. Do you understand? This is Canada, one country away. And these assisted suicide things are all over the place now. And I forget, I don't know if it was Canada or another country, there were like 10,000 people last year that had assisted suicide. I mean, things that would fall within the definition of assisted suicide. So now the proposal is, under these laws in Canada, is, well, if you die and your heart stops beating, but we need your organs, we can restart your heart. Now, I don't know what all that does. I'm just telling you is that this is a brave new world, and I don't really like it. We see the controversy in the United States. This is kind of interesting. This is an article from the Times of London. And it says, this is what the NHS now, the National Health Service, says, most chance children just going through a phase. But they had a whole clinic, but now that clinic's being sued by over 1,000 parents and former patients, the Tavistock Clinic, because of what they did, the mutilations that they did to kids, who then regretted it. But here in the United States, if you talk about this on a college campus, you're going to be pilloried. It's insanity. Here's a little thing that somebody sent me. This is a new device. It's called the Wallet of Tomorrow. And you see here, wallet more, get your implant. And where does it go? The Wallet of Tomorrow. Wallet more payment implant. And here's a X-ray picture of where it ends up. Now, I'm not saying this is the mark or anything like this, but I'm saying is, look, and it'll be sold as a good idea. Look at what it says here in the blue at the bottom. You can't lose or forget your Wallet More payment implant. You always have it with you. So I've been known to leave things places. My wife will attest to that. So I have those little tile things that, you know, I forget what it was. I think I paid for something. I left my wallet on the counter at a Kroger and I walked outside and I can turn it on to play it. And I walked back to the counter and the lady was there like, this wallet started playing a tune all by itself. What's going on? It was freaking me out. And I said, well, not as freaked out as I was about leaving the thing. So this is, there's a little enlarged picture of it. And get your implant now, $249. No, I know Pam's thinking that might be worth it. I can see her back there. What you should do, download the app, arrange installation with a specialist, activate your device. And so this will all be tied into central bank digital currencies at some point. So let me just make a few more comments. I've talked about this a lot, probably to the point where people are sick of it. This is the line of buoys off the coast of the Israel-Lebanon border. And they go out for about 2.5 miles. Then the ocean gets too deep to have the buoys there. And this has been sort of the line of demarcation for a long time, but it became, Lebanon was very clever. And so what they did was, this is the border. This is, there's a village here, upper left, called Rosh HaNikra. And here's the border. South of that is Israel. The foreground is Lebanon. But you see how the border comes down the ridge, and then it goes down, and then it kind of makes a little curve. So that's what Lebanon did when they were arguing about what the border was. They put that curve, they built that into their line, particularly when there was gas discovered. And so this is the big maritime, just the agreement that they had. Here's Amos Hochstein, the U.S. mediator. And the agreement's not really between Lebanon and Israel. It's between Israel and the United States and Lebanon and the United States. Israel's the guarantor. So when Lapid gets on and says, they recognized us, they didn't recognize you. All the things that they say in these articles are, negotiations with the enemy. And here's what they say, the journey of 16 years, this is Al Akbar, the newspaper of Hezbollah, one of their newspapers in Lebanon. And they always talk about occupied Palestine or the enemy entity. They never mention Israel. And you see this. So here's another picture of the border area. There's a lovely grottos there and that sort of thing. And Nasrallah's come out, and Amos Hochstein was in Lebanon for the signing. Then he went to Israel for the signing. By the way, he served in the Obama administration as the energy secretary. He then went, after the Obama administration went out of office, he went and served as the executive vice president of marketing for a Houston-based company called Tellurian, which is one of the largest liquefied natural gas producers in the world. And so now when everybody needs gas, because Russia's cut off gas, the only way you can really get the gas to, by and large, to Europe that they need is LNG, liquefied natural gas. And lo and behold, here's the guy who's negotiating all these deals who used to work for one of the largest LNG producers in the world. I'm sure that's just a coincidence. By the way, he went to Israel in his youth and served 3 years in the Israeli Defense Force. It's just kind of an interesting thing. So here's Nasrallah. He was talking about the deal this week, and he came out and, maybe we can spring and get him a PowerPoint so he doesn't have to use these charts and everything. But he was explaining the charts on TV the other night, and he, I think I have what he said here someplace. Well, I don't. Well, anyway, he just said, listen, this is a deal. So there's a lot of controversy. The elections are coming up in Israel on Tuesday, the 1st. This is one article. This is typical of what you'll see in the Israeli newspapers, a capitulation contract for Israel. Then you go over to Marev or other Israeli newspapers, Haaretz, and, oh, this is just a wonderful deal. Yair Lapid, he's such a great guy. Look at what he did. He saved us all this. He stopped war with Hezbollah. But did he? What's happening in the Judea and Samaria, the areas known as the West Bank to a lot of people? It's in kind of a meltdown. Nablus has been closed. They've had raids. They've captured and killed terrorists. It's really dicey. And so, and the other person who seems to be rising out of this, though, this guy is like the luckiest guy in the world. He's standing for election next year. Their economy's in a mess. But here now, Putin is saying, hey, we'll make Turkey a big energy hub. Here's a Moscow to build natural gas hub in Turkey. And here he is making a speech the other day. And the foreign minister of Turkey, world global geopolitical center in trade and energy. And here's some of the gas pipelines across Europe, including Turk Stream up there. But there's not enough to replace the, it has a capacity of about 20 billion cubic meters per year. And Europe is at a shortfall of 155 billion cubic meters per year because of the Russian shutoffs. Although Russia is still selling them some liquefied natural gas, but they don't have enough facilities. There's an article, LNG ships backed up off Europe's coast. They can't unload it fast enough. So they've done pretty good at filling up the capacity, and Europe is having a warm spell right now. So maybe they'll get through this winter. But what are they going to do next year if the gas supplies are not restored? Russia offered to repair the Nord Stream pipelines, and Germany said no. Which sort of goes back to what I said last week. I think I heard this first from Dennis Prager. When it comes to geopolitics and doing the right thing, Germany is almost always wrong. Bloomberg says, this is what Bloomberg says, there's just not enough supply to do this. Here's a little thing from the Wall Street Journal that sort of explains the problem of natural gas.
The race to find alternatives to Russian energy has accelerated after Moscow's decision to cut its supply of natural gas to Bulgaria and Poland.
Is another very stark reminder that we need to work with reliable partners and build our energy independence.
The European Union gets around 40% of its gas from Russia. But as the war in Ukraine rages on, the bloc said it aims to slash 2/3 of its purchases by the end of the year. To help cover this shortfall, the US has ramped up shipments of liquefied natural gas, or LNG, to its Western allies. But this move has also begun to drain domestic supplies and is pushing up prices in the US.
We're pretty much tapped out. There's nothing more to send.
Here's why providing natural gas from the US is so complicated, and what energy producers are trying to do about it. Even before Russia invaded Ukraine, domestic inventories of natural gas across the US were already lean due to various factors. There have been extreme weather events like a cold snap in Texas that paralyzed power plants and helped drain global stockpiles. Plus, during the pandemic, US producers tapped into their inventory of already drilled wells amassed over years, instead of drilling new, costly wells. Draining their inventory kept them afloat financially, but has limited their ability to grow production now that fossil fuel demand is growing. Then came Russia's invasion of Ukraine and heightened calls on the EU to reduce its reliance on Russian energy. And to help with that transition, President Biden made a pledge.
We're taking additional steps in lockstep with our allies and partners to raise the economic pressure on Putin.
These steps come at a time when the amount of gas in storage in the lower 48 states is 17% below the 5-year average for this time of year. Despite dwindling supply, the US now aims to send 50 billion cubic meters of LNG to Europe every year until at least 2030. That would make up for about a third of the gas the EU receives from Russia.
Since the war, the US has become the largest supplier of liquefied natural gas to Europe, but there's a limit to how much the US can supply.
And for American producers looking to supply more LNG overseas, it's no easy feat. That's because transporting natural gas is more complicated than oil or coal. After the gas is drilled from the ground, it's put through a pipeline. It's then sent to a plant that functions like a massive refrigerator, where it's chilled into a liquid state for shipping.
That super refrigerator that turns it into a liquid, those are multi-billion-dollar facilities. The ones that are running, that we have built right now, are running at full capacity.
And building these super refrigerators could take years.
Really, the earliest that additional US supplies could be put on the market to Europe or anywhere is 2025, 2026.
The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has given the green light to build 13 new LNG facilities in the US, but companies haven't started construction, largely because many haven't been able to secure the financing. And some producers are worried about whether there'll be a demand for LNG in the long run amid a global transition to cleaner energy.
What they need is commercial certainty that there's demand for this product, and not just demand now, but demand over the long term. So usually these projects are seeking 20-year supply deals because it can take as much as 7 years to even begin seeing a return.
But in the short term, as these options are debated, consumers will feel the pinch.
We are now the largest exporter of natural gas in the world. So there's just more demand for the gas coming out of the US, and that's going to push prices higher for the foreseeable future.
And here in the UK, or there in the UK, the BBC is preparing scripts to use in case of winter blackouts. The BBC has prepared secret scripts to be broadcast if energy shortages cause blackouts or the loss of gas supplies this winter. The draft scripts set out how the corporation would reassure people in the event that a major loss of power causes mobile phone networks, the internet, banking systems, or traffic lights to fail across England, Wales, and Scotland. The public would be advised to use their car radios or battery-powered receivers to listen to emergency broadcasts on FM and long-wave frequencies usually reserved for Radio 2 and Radio 4. One draft BBC script warns that a blackout could last up to 2 days, with hospitals and police placed under extreme pressure by the crisis. The government has said that it's hoped power will be restored in the next 36 to 48 hours, said one draft. Different parts of Britain will start to receive intermittent supplies before then. That's good news. This is an interesting editorial cartoon that I saw, the US and Europe working together on the energy problem. I just thought it was very, very clever. And it seems to be very, very true. So I would highly recommend, I'm not going to go through it in detail. Seth Frantzman did a very good job in the Jerusalem Post about a week ago, I think October 20th article. The Russia-Iran alliance, its dangers to the world order. I think it was published in the Friday, October 21st print publication. You can find it online at jpost.com. Excellent analysis about looking back and seeing how this alliance between Russia and Iran has been really in place since the Obama administration back in 2009. The Obama administration came into play, and how they were trying to say, well, we'll do this to help limit the nukes and missiles that are coming out of Iran. And has any of that happened? And the answer is that none of this happened. This is a picture that I got from Khomeini's website. It's sort of like the tree represents the strong Iran. This is the imagery that's being conveyed. But look at the things that are trying to cut it down. For example, here's a chainsaw from the USA. Here's a missile. And then here are, of course, things with the Star of David. And from the Star of David, it hits the tree, it becomes ineffective, and a new growth comes out. You see the imagery that's being used. This is how Khomeini does it. A great article in Alma about Iran emerging as the leading accurate firepower supplier to Russia and what they can do in response. It relates to the Shahed 136 drones. I think Russia, I just read, has ordered another 2,000 of these drones. They cost about $20,000 to build. They have a little two-cylinder engine on them. They can have about, 35, 40 pounds of explosive put on them. The Shahed one, by the way, means martyr. That's what they call the drone. And remember, there were these pictures of the underground base that I showed you a couple months ago, where Iran is building these things. They've now outsourced a lot of the construction of these drones to Tajikistan, which makes it more difficult for Israel to take them out because it's 1,000 miles further away than Tehran. So it makes an attack on them very difficult. And then this is a Iranian news outlet about how these drones are launched. They just put them on a truck, pop that thing up, and then boom, off they go. And they're noisy as all get out. There's a pretty good article at the Carnegie Foundation. Lapid says this: the whole world is in danger from these drones. I think he's right. They're not particularly sophisticated, but they're noisy. Here's the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace talking about this. Great article. You can find it online at Carnegie Endowment for Peace, carnegieendowment.org. And it says this: an important objective for Moscow is psychological, to spread fear and intimidation that will undercut Ukrainian morale and compel the government into submission. And the mental effect of the drones has been unnerving. Information operations are a key component of modern warfare, and Moscow knows that when it comes to shaping narratives about the war, it has been on the losing end. Russia intends for the kamikaze drones to shift the narrative, yet the psychological impact of the drone campaign is likely to be low. While the strikes bring significant suffering, harm, and corresponding violations of international humanitarian law, they may perversely strengthen Ukrainian resolve. However, if the benefits of the drone campaign are dubious for Russia, the same cannot be said for Iran, the supplier of the drones. Iran's entry into the conflict, similar to Turkey's supply of TB2 drones to Ukraine's military, signifies a more meaningful geopolitical shift. In the past decade, drone technology has advanced at a rapid clip, with emerging powers such as Iran, Turkey, Israel, and the UAE at the forefront. As the technology used for drones has become more cost-effective and accessible, an array of ambitious actors have been able to enter the market, bringing both profits and geopolitical returns. And so what Iran gets out of this, it gets intelligence. How is our things performing? And remember, these are the drones that were used in large part in the attack on the Iranian or the Saudi oil facilities back a couple years ago. Those came largely from Yemen, but they attacked the largest oil refinery facility and damaged it significantly, that it was offline for a month or so. So understand that these things have a big geopolitical impact. So, as we talk about the, seems to have lost my mount. There it is. If we talk about the geopolitical impact of these, there's a big benefit to Iran to having these. So I have one more thing I'll talk about, and I promise right now when I say that, it's one more thing, okay? Because I'm not thinking that far ahead. So I may revise and extend my remarks. Don't they say that in Congress all the time? I'm going to talk, when I do a midweek update, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that FII Institute thing in Saudi Arabia. And I'll talk a little bit about NEOM, but here's just a sort of a little picture of NEOM. We talk about this line city, 100 miles long, 1,500 feet high. I mean, it's 2/3 the height of the tallest building on the planet, each side of this thing. They're building it. This is not some pipe dream or anything like that. They're actually out there building it. So we'll talk a little bit more about that because there have been some developments there. This is also going to be a big thing coming up in the next couple of weeks. They're having the COP27 green energy religious meeting. It's really a religious meeting. They have sins, unforgivable sins, and that type of thing from these green energy people. And they're having this is from the Yale Forum on Religion and Ecology. On the right, returning to Mount Sinai, a prophetic call for climate justice and ceremony of repentance. You see how it's a religion? It's uniting all the religions of the world, and they're doing this at Sharm el-Sheikh, which is right across the strait from where Neom is. And here's a little picture of that. So here's the final thing I was going to talk about. 4 days until the election in Israel. And the interesting thing, Israel does something that I think is an act of mercy. They don't allow, within like 5 days of the election, they don't allow polling and that type of thing to be broadcast. But so now the question is, how are they going to, what's going to be the result? So when you break it down and you add all of the different factions together, Brian, can you zoom in on the right of this slide? If he's back there. Brian. Anyway, let's see, maybe I have another chart. Okay, so you need 61. So there's a Israeli politician named Ayelet Shaked who heads up the Jewish Home Party, the Yamina Party. That was the party of Naftali Bennett, but he's left public life for now, or will be when the election occurs. So Yesh Atid and everybody to the left, those are a lot of different. National Unity Party, that's the Danny Gantz. But look at the Likud. Let's just say Ayelet Shaked party could take a lot of votes away from the people on the right because they're largely conservative, religious, Zionist, that type of thing. So you need 61 votes. So look at what they have right now based on the most recent polling that they were allowed to publish. Likud is 31. Religious Zionism is 14. That's 45. Shas is 9. And this assumes that Ayelet Shaked doesn't get enough to get 4 seats. And United Torah Judaism is 6. So you have 6 plus 9 is 15, plus 14 is 29, plus 31 is 60. How many seats do you need in the Likud to form a government? And 61. So right now, it looks like there might be here's a little bit different breakdown from, you can zoom back out. And on the right here, you have the different breakdowns and some of the different scenarios. This is from Friday's Israel Hayom. You can find this online. And you can see the numbers just aren't really working out for anybody. So if you think our politics are a mess, and on the right here, you see the article, we need 61, and how do we get there? And right now, it doesn't look like anyone can get there, although it's possible that Netanyahu's Likud might get there. But it's going to be close. And so Likud, Netanyahu is saying, boy, if I get the majority, we'll have a stable government for 4 years. So in the last, 3 years, they've had 5 elections. Can you imagine what torture that is for people? And, a lot of people don't like Netanyahu. He's been around a long time, and people get tired of their leaders. And so there are strong, never Netanyahu people on the right side of the political ledger in Germany, just like there are never Trump people on the right side of the political ledger here in the United States. So we'll see. This was the headline in the article on Friday, 96 hours to the election. So Tuesday evening here in the United States, we should have some idea as to how this has gone. So pray that, the right decision is made. I do have one more thing, and I'll talk about it midweek update. This is a preview, so it doesn't count. Okay. There's a guy in Israel right now. who a lot of people are referring to as the Messiah. A young guy, very knowledgeable in Torah. They've attributed some miracles to him. I'll talk more about him. I'm still studying it. There's plenty of videos out there, but I want to make sure I talk about why I know something. But listen, we know that Jesus said that there would be what? False Christ and false prophets come in the end times. And we know there's only one true Messiah, that's Jesus. So that would imply that anything else is false. But he's become, has quite a significant following among the, I would say, the Torah observant Orthodox community in Israel. So we'll talk more about that. But that just sort of piles all these things up. There's all these, I saw an article about 600 Levites practicing their priestly roles in Israel. We have the red heifers. We have plans to build a temple. And we all know that all of this is coming at some point. So, I think it's just part of the convergence that we're seeing. So anyway, we'll talk more about that midweek or next week. So anyway, so let's pray and, pay attention to what's going on. Lord, thank you so much for the opportunity that you've given us through your word so that we can understand the times in which we live. We pray that you'll help us to take that to heart, but also use it as a motivation for us to be in the word, to put on the armor of God, and to share the gospel of Jesus Christ with those around us, because the time is short and there are places in this world, might even be places in the countries in which people listening to this live, where it is getting very close to the opportunities we have, may be the last time we have an opportunity to share the gospel. We pray that you'll bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen. You heard about the thing in South Korea where they had a Halloween celebration. There were like 156 people crushed to death in the crowd. And a friend of mine said her son was there and left 30 minutes before that happened. So I'm just saying that is an indication that you just don't know in today's world when your last opportunity is. So if you're resisting Jesus, don't. Now's the day of salvation. So thank you very much.